Ladies and one gentleman, welcome to our 25th Aviation Women Panel of Ladies Beyond Flying. My name is Daniel Stecher, Vice President, Airline Operations and Business Development, IBS Software. I'm the host and technical facilitator of Ladies Beyond Flying Aviation Women Panel, and it's a big honor to have today a real expert in social responsibility and sustainability, Monjing from AirAsia, and I hope we have a lovely discussion after her presentation. And I wish us fantastic 45, 60 minutes. It depends from the dynamics in this group. Stage is yours, Monjing.
Thank you, everyone. I'm calling in from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, so it's 9 o'clock at night. So bear with me if I'm not fully 100% there. But it's been really interesting. I've been following the group since I think about 6 months now, Daniel, or late last year, as I took up the role in sustainability. So a little bit of introduction about myself. I was trained as an economist, and I became I had a pretty kind of interesting career path. So I started as an economist, and then I became a journalist. And when I was interviewing my boss, who's the founder of the airline, he offered me a job. So then that's how I started in AirAsia in 2004. I was the route planner and the strategic planner, managing fleet planning, route planning, crew planning, as well as schedules. I did that for 4 years, and it was a very exciting time because it was during this period where AirAsia first started. So we had rapid expansion in Southeast Asia. Today, of course, for those of you who do not know AirAsia is the biggest, has the biggest network in Southeast Asia. It's one of the biggest carriers in Asia. Just before the pandemic in 2017, we carried 70 million passengers. So we operate for 4 countries, that is Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and Thailand. And my role has always covered the region. So I spent a lot of time also in these countries. After about 4 years, so the job was really intense. It was really about expanding the network. We covered the whole, when I started, it was mostly a domestic carrier. We ended up covering all 10 countries in Southeast Asia, and we started a rapid expansion into China. And those were really exciting days in 2007, 2008, when the Chinese aviation sector was really opening up to foreign carriers as well. So just before the pandemic, we were actually the airline with the largest number of connections into China in different Chinese cities as well. After 4 years, I took a career break. I went to do my master's, and I decided I wanted to do something different, and that was to start a social enterprise. But I didn't have any money, so I rang up my boss and said, I need money to start my social enterprise. And he said, oh, that's a really good idea. I'm an entrepreneur. I always wanted to do something good with the airline. So why don't you start a foundation, and then we'll figure out how, you can get your money to do this. And, this year we just celebrated the 10th anniversary of the foundation. So my path sort of got diverted. And I was having a chat with Elizabeth earlier, Liz, in London, because one of the projects that we worked in Indonesia also involved Liz and Simon from London, and we were working with silversmiths in the old city of Yogyakarta. So the foundation's work was really threefold, and this we started before sustainability or ESG came into kind of popular lexicon. It was really about going beyond the CSR activity. So of course CSR is still prevalent in this region. It's really just one of activities. Either you visit a home or you do some tree planting, and then you never hear from us again. So we wanted to change that and use whatever little resources we had, or whatever resources we had, to do something and to own a cause. And there were 3 things we did. So the first one was to support small businesses and social businesses. So we provide them with some funding, and we try to leverage whatever we have within the network, whether it is communications, introducing their products into our supply chain. So that was, in a way, bringing sustainability principles and ethical sourcing into the supply chain without it being, kind of an ESG framework in those days. The second thing that we did was about post-disaster relief and rehabilitation. We are in a region which is vulnerable to major problems, especially in Philippines and Indonesia. So in Indonesia, since one of our trips actually, Liz, was almost cancelled because the volcano erupted. And since then, there have been some really terrible climate-linked disasters. Of course, there is the natural disaster, which you must have heard of, the Asian tsunami in 2004 in Aceh. So one of the big things that we did was we were the first airline to start a commercial flight into Aceh. And this was a region that was just recovering from conflict. So the flight really made a huge difference, not only in making connections possible, but all sorts of things, rebuild the economy, build a new tourism economy, etc. And the other big campaign we did was in 2013 when Typhoon Haiyan, if you remember that, hit the Philippines. That was the strongest typhoon on record, and it totally devastated huge parts. And one of it was actually a place that we were flying to. The airport was really ravaged. We had staff that went missing for 27 days. We located them. They were sleeping in tents for a month to enable flights to continue. So we became the first commercial carrier to fly back into the destination to bring people out and to bring aid in. So subsequently, we did a lot more campaigns that followed through on that as well. And the last thing that we did, which actually came from my journalism days, which is a broad anti-trafficking initiative. So one of the reasons that came about was because as a journalist, I used to meet up with people who were working on refugee and migrant trafficking issues. And one of the sessions, I met somebody who a contact that said that, they have been rescuing a lot of people who were trafficked into Malaysia. And if you know anything about the trafficking scenario in the region, Southeast Asia is a source of 25% of trafficking victims. A large number of them actually fly on our network as well because of just the sheer size of the network. A lot of them come from Vietnam, Cambodia, Indonesia, Philippines, and they are trafficked into places like Japan and Australia. So they asked us to do two things. One, which was to train our staff to recognize the signs of trafficking and take action about it. And the second thing that they asked us to do was disseminate information. So since 2017, we've had a kind of a long campaign that we have been training our staff. All our frontline staff are trained to spot the signs and to take action. So that is kind of the background of what I do at the foundation. In 2010, sustainability just dropped onto my lap because as we grow, even though the foundation was kind of working on what these activities we were talking about, I was just talking about, ESG has sort of begun growing as well. But in Southeast Asia, it is kind of grouped under a communications function because people still saw it as CSR. So they thought, okay, so it has to be a communications function because you're dealing with external people. So, you do a lot of activities where you do some tree planting activities so you can put it in the press, etc. But of course, things began changing very fast. We are asked by listed exchanges to explain what our ESG principles, etc. And they became more of a discipline as well. So the person who was in charge of communications left, and then my bosses decided, okay, since you're kind of doing the foundation, you take charge of it, not really knowing the full extent of what it really covers as well. And it was a steep learning curve for me in the past 1.5, 2 years. And since then, we've brought a lot of discipline into it. And what I'm going to talk about today will also be sharing some of the journey that I took and the learnings and the kind of pitfalls that we've gone through as well, how to really get the whole organization on board as well. Of course, it's still a work in progress, but we are getting, one step closer every day. So I've got some slides, I prepared some slides. So I would just want to share a little bit about, so today I'll be talking a lot more about social sustainability, given that this is really about a group of women in aviation. So Daniel, can you see my slides already? Or...
No.
I'll share it again. Okay. So do you see it now?
Yeah. Now if you go in presenter mode, perfect.
Okay. So, right. So this is AirAsia, and I want to talk about our social sustainability and bringing the conversation back into diversity and inclusion. Of course, aviation is one of the most gender imbalanced industries still, especially in Asia. Of course, all of you would have heard of this big this image called the Singapore Girl, and that has sort of colored women in aviation for generations. When you talk about women in aviation, they inevitably think that you are a cabin crew. So when I first joined aviation, this was the prevailing attitude. So the first thing that we did, one of the major things that we did was really to extend the retirement age. And I'll tell you, you might find it so archaic now, but when I joined AirAsia in 2004, the retirement age for most crew was between 35 to 40 years. And the reason for that is because they felt that women who have passed the age of 35 do not look as good in the uniform anymore. So if you think of the uniforms of what cabin crew wear in those days, they are all form-fitting, and the idea of the crew is the perfect woman. So for generations, this is considered, kind of what cabin crew should be in Asia. So one of the first things we did was to change the retirement age to 55. And the resistance in the industry took 10 years for other carriers to follow along. I think it took Singapore Airlines a good 10 years before they also extended the retirement age to, I believe it was 45. So that was one of the major things that we championed in the region. The other one was to bring women pilots in. So when I joined again, there was one female pilot in the whole of the country, and that was an AirAsia pilot. Today, there are about 140. And I think our percentage now is about 6.2%, which is not very bad. It's slightly above the global average at 5.8%. But I believe the highest, because I was looking at some statistics, I think Daniel, you're from Lufthansa, and I think Lufthansa is about 8% women. And the highest is India at 12, Air India, about 12.8%. So within our group, there are 4 countries. The highest country with the highest percentage of female pilots within the AirAsia group is Indonesia, which surprised me actually. It's 10.7% of women pilots in Indonesia. So this was really a concerted policy from our management to bring more women into these roles as well. The other thing we did is actually on LGBTQ inclusion. So we are operating in a region where it is really not, in 2 countries, especially Malaysia and Indonesia, and the prevailing religion is Islam. So LGBTQ is really not accepted officially. So we can't have legal rights to protect rights as well. So except this is taking place in the Philippines. So one of the things that we do is that we use the freedom we have in some legislations to carry out policies which then we will include in the group, but not overtly. So there are a lot of policies that we have in the company which it has LGBTQ inclusion principles, but not overtly stating that, because legally that would not be possible. The other thing, of course, will be to provide disabled-friendly facilities, which were non-existent. In fact, today, if you go to many parts in Asia, it's still very inaccessible for people with mobility limitations. So this was some of the things that we started out doing. And then, of course, bringing women in aviation required not only bringing in women in as pilots, but also in the other roles. The one that is most challenging for us actually is women engineers, because women pilots, it's high profile, people see that and women see that and they want to join, but it's been much, much harder for us to get women engineers. Till today, the percentage of female engineers is about 6%, still pretty low. But the interesting part is that we managed to get more women into our technical roles. So the one on the top right will be the people who do baggage handling and security as well. So these are the 4 job areas which are very, very difficult for us to change the gender balance. And there's some progress made definitely in all of this. So it's really interesting when I interviewed the guy. I was talking to my ex-colleague who was the guy who first introduced women as baggage handlers, and his former job, he came from the army and he used to be the head of military intelligence, and he was given the task to recruit women as baggage handlers. So it was very interesting when I had a chat with him, and I said, why did you do it? And he said, well, boss said we should try. So I did it. So he went to a careers fair and started offering the role to women. And to his great surprise, he found that his overall department performance improved, because when women joined, it totally changed the dynamics of the workplace. So the guys started coming to work earlier. They started dressing up better. And he was saying like they smell better too, because they take pains over their appearance. So the other thing that they did, it changed their professionalism as well, because if the guys could see that women could do this job better than them, then it put more incentive for them to do better as well. So these are some of the good things, but it hasn't been without its challenges. And I will share with you some of the boo-boos that we made over the years. And here is some of them. And part of it is, so I talk about this anti-trafficking. I'll skip this. So what are the bad ones? So to set the context, so we started, the people who started the airline originally were from the music industry. And that industry is full of I would say quite archaic views of women, especially. So some of the early ads were quite objectionable. So this was one of the first ones. One of the really famous ones, actually, in fact, most of us didn't see that as being offensive. So the ad actually was poking fun at Singapore Airlines as well, because the whole idea was that the whole image of the airline was built on this girl image. She's not even a woman, she's a girl. So when we launched our flights into Singapore, this was the ad. There's a new girl in town, she's twice the fun and half the price. It was in the days where, I think for people who were in the UK, you will also remember the tongue-in-cheek ads that Ryanair took on. And so this was one of those things that people really loved. But if you look back at it today, you probably think, oh, this is actually pretty offensive. And of course, there are all these hidden meaning in the ad. So all the crew that you see there were former Singapore Airlines crew. And where the plane is a location where the Singapore Airlines Tower used to be here on the skyline. So there was all these things that my boss created in this ad, which was really to challenge the authorities in Singapore, which was trying to prevent us from flying into the country. So this was very popular when we went out in the public. But the kind of, I guess there was only one person that really got offended by it at the time. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, it was our trade minister, who was a very, very famous minister, a woman minister. So I had prepared a deck for Tony, and he went in to make a presentation to the cabinet on some regulatory issues, and this ad was in the deck. And he said, he came out later and he said she almost leapt across the table at him when he put out this ad. So that really got him thinking and got other people thinking as well. But it was what it was in those days, that it was completely acceptable to have ads like this. This is another really offensive one. It was pulled. It was done to. So when it actually came out, the ad actually appeared halfway. So it sort of stopped here, and if you click on the picture, it came out. So when the picture stopped here, it would look as if it's breasts. So that created a furore, and that had to be pulled. And the last one you see there, Get Off in Thailand. So that one was actually taken out in 2017, 2018, and it was by our Australia office. So that one created quite a bit of controversy as well. So as we go along, these are some of the challenges that I face, So some of it was really low awareness. A lot of people think sustainability really means CSR. And when you tell them that, things are, it's no longer acceptable to just focus on CSR, but you really have to look at measurable, quantifiable areas that, there is an entire framework for you to look at. So that always face difficulties. So people will always think, why are you touching on the areas of the environment, or why are you talking about this? Because your job is really about CSR. So that's one of the major challenges. And it's not just one or two people, it's generally across the board. The other one is adapting to changing norms. So as I said, even in the 14, 15 years that I spent in the aviation industry, it has considerably changed. So in the old days, it was completely acceptable for us to have an event, and every event will have to have a few female crew who were selected, particularly because they look good and their job would only be to stand there and have their picture taken. And so those are some of the things which were widespread in the industry. And I mean, I think with Me Too, a lot of it has changed. And certainly within AirAsia, it has changed, because a few years back, we had a female CEO, and she absolutely said that's not something I would accept. I will have crew, but it will have to be balanced. If I have a female crew, I will have to have a male crew as well. So some of those things are changing, but it's it's definitely not easy, because there is a prevailing orthodoxy as well. Internally, these are some of the challenges that I continue to face today. Some of it would be if you are working on something to do with the environment, and the immediate response would be, well, that costs money, we are not going to do that. But it's focusing on a very narrow understanding of environmental responsibility, and they think of it that it would mean, if I have to source for biodegradable packaging, it would definitely cost money and we can't afford it now. But there's a lot more that can be done, which are not done, and it doesn't mean that it costs money, and that convincing them of that is one part of the challenge. The other one, when it comes to gender equality, is that people always mistake it to mean that we are asking for preferential quotas, and that creates a lot of unhappiness, even though no one has ever talked about quotas at all. And so one of the things I did last year was really to put out a survey on what to kind of gauge our staff understanding of what gender equality means. And then what we found in the survey, I mean, we get responses such as men also face discrimination. That was very, very, very popular response. So men also face discrimination. And when we drill down to try to understand what they mean, and actually found that it was conflated with the issues that people who are gay would face. So if you are a gay man, they feel discriminated as well, because they tend to get teased a lot more. People make comments about them. So it's very how they say, desensitized. People would make comments about people's appearances. So those are some of the things that it still takes time to change as well. So one of the things that is important is to kind of understand where is the sentiment coming from, and try to come up with measures or policies that can address that particular challenge. And one of it could be related to bullying. It could be related to other forms of harassment, and not necessarily because they have anything against having a more equal working environment. And of course, then there is this issue about whose job is it, because sustainability was never part of anybody's KPI. So they don't think that it's got to do with them. They think that it's my job because I have a title of sustainability. So if we're talking about how do we ensure that we recycle our trash, we separate our trash on board, the response is that, well, you sort it out. I said, me, I have to sort it out because my title is sustainability. So getting people to change that way of thinking, to incorporate that into their everyday activity, their normal course of work, is another hurdle as well. Of course, we are doing this in the context of post-COVID recovery. I think it was not as bad in Europe, where you still were flying, but in Southeast Asia, we were actually closed down for months. In Malaysia, there was 4 months where we didn't fly at all. So as the airline recovers, we are still less than half what we were operating. We are still about 40% of what we were operating before, because many of the large economies still have not opened. Japan is just opening up next month. China is completely closed, and China was about 30% of our international passenger base. So when we talk about sustainability, one of my challenges is, right, how do I convince people that they have to do things that could be an investment into the future, but may not necessarily return you immediate value, but it's something that we need for the future. So those are some challenges that we face. But how do we go around tackling it? So firstly, it's really to leverage on some of the legal and policy changes and making it count for them. So some of the things that have been happening recently will be changes in anti-sexual harassment legislation. The government has just introduced mandated quotas, a minimum one female board member for all public listed companies, and they have made these part of duties and obligations of directors. So that has really helped, and that's one of the things that I've leveraged on to point out to them, look, if you don't do it, you as a director will be liable. And so that has created also some impetus for people to change and to accept that changes will have to be made. The second one is strengthening governance. So in the past, sustainability was a unit that ran on its own. It didn't report to anyone in the board. So one of the best practices in sustainability is really to get management and board accountability. So we set up sustainability working groups that involve all heads of departments. So they have to be there. They will be aware. And also, every quarter we report to the board. So the board will also have to be tracking the developments as well. Otherwise, they themselves will be liable if we do not meet any sort of climate regulations or any of these quotas for gender representation. But the most important thing, and the one that I think has been made the most difference, is how to translate sustainability into quantifiable values. So when I first brought up this issue of gender equality, I mean, I was surprised by the backlash that took place in the organization. I mean, there were people who were really offended. They felt that AirAsia already had a lot of women in charge and a lot of women in different professions. We've made a lot of headway into bringing women into professions that were previously male dominated. So they felt that, you know, they didn't understand where I was coming from, and data really, really helped. So what I did was I got them to pull out all the data. We tracked gender representation across different job types. We published our gender pay gap. That was quite important because we wanted to ensure that women were not paid less for doing an equal job. We also tracked the representation across different types of job and levels. So one of the things that was irrefutable was that, yes, you think that we are well represented because there's a good representation of women in senior roles, but the gap really was in middle management. So we have very few women in middle management. And so by pointing this out, this has become something that we really have to monitor as well, and understand why are women leaving the company when they get to a managerial level. Is it because they are not getting promoted, or is it because it's just really a shortage of women managers across the board anyway, and that makes them more attractive to other companies as well? So the other thing is really stepping up internal communications. I've really been talking a lot about sustainability, but each time I do it, it's at different levels, at different audiences. I tailor it to them as well. So when I talk to, so recently when we talked to the government relations team, it's really to talk about areas that really matter to them, things like legislative changes. But when we talk to people in operations, it will be a different focus as well. So tailoring the communication is very, very, has been really helpful. So it's not just one presentation across the board, but to really make it count for them. Getting them up to speed is another thing. Having sustainability is one thing, but how do we get people up to doing the best that they could do? One of the things that we found really helpful is to benchmark against global indices. So as a public listed company, we are already rated according to FTSE for Good ratings. That's the UK FTSE for Good Sustainability Index. But we also submit, we are invited to submit for the S&P Corporate Sustainability Assessment. And that's the one that provides the score for Dow Jones Sustainability Index. When we started out 2019, my predecessors, 2018, we scored about 50%. And over the years, our score dropped from 50 to 40 to 30. And I was really puzzled. When I was looking through our track record, I was trying to understand why our scores were deteriorating. Was it because we were slipping? But I found that we weren't actually slipping, but the difference was that the standards kept going up and we were not catching up. So one of the things that we do now is that we share the guidelines for CSA ratings to all the heads of departments so that they know they are being measured on these areas. The latest one, actually, we signed up, we are currently in the process of completing the submission, is the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. So that has been really instructive as well, because it measures 5 areas. It measures your gender representation, whether it's a pay gap, whether you have inclusive culture, which includes things like maternity policies. And that actually pointed out something that was really unfair for women who work in aviation in Asia. So unlike in North America, I'm not sure what is the policy in Europe now, but in North America, if you are a pregnant pilot or cabin crew, you can continue working almost up to the time that you're ready to give birth. But in Asia, the prevailing legislation is that the moment you find out you're pregnant, you have to stop flying. And there's no clear reason why, and it's only cloaked under this broad term of safety. And when I read through the ruling, it basically assumes that a woman becomes emotionally unstable when she becomes pregnant and therefore is not safe to fly a plane. And that is such outdated thinking, and it's still in law in all these countries. So one of the things that the Bloomberg exercise has highlighted to us is this particular clause, and that's something that we're working on to repeal or to work with the legislations to review this clause based on best practices in North America. And the last one, of course, we've actually found really instructive. I think this one is related more to climate, is to put these things in financial terms. So, of course, there are people who support ESG, some people who don't believe in it, but they will believe in it if you can put it in financial terms. So one of the things we've done a lot of is modeling. So we build models to model what would climate change cost us in terms of offsets in using biofuels, but also if we don't have sufficient pilots, how can diversity help us reduce the burden? How can we reduce the shortage of manpower if we are able to address this issue of maternity policy for cabin crew and pilots? So those are some of the things that have been really helpful, putting it in numbers. Then the next step is really to set goals and targets. So we review a lot of best practice, some of the best the airlines that are ranked well. We look at what are their targets, and we use a bit of a shame tactic as well. So if someone in a particular HOD would tell us that, oh, this cannot be done, then a good counter to it would be, well, it's being done in this airline. I can't, so it actually changes how people view, because the other one is really to compare or to sort of, so if, I work in a regional role. So if I want to, I could also use them against each other. So I would say like, oh, in Indonesia, we have 10%. You are only doing 5% women. What is holding you back? And so when you put it up on a dashboard and everybody can see, that motivates them to also take corrective action. I think I mentioned quarterly updates, but one of the things that we're also doing is we are inviting external speakers as well. So it's been really something that has been lacking because we kind of have been working pretty much within our own world, and we have been a kind of a leader in aviation for many years, but a lot of things other industries are doing better. So getting external speakers to come in and share their viewpoints has also been something that we think will be helpful for us to get our entire organization to a higher level on ESG attainments. So I think that's what I want to share for now. I will open the floor if there are any questions, please.
Thank you very much, Munching. Amazing presentation. And I'm glad that you could make this presentation today. I would have the first question from my side before maybe the other ask their questions. Our industry is pretty much regulated, and especially management follows new rules and regulations. So with this, what you have presented today, do you think this is the way forward, that regulations have first to be changed in favor for women, or initiatives like Ladies Beyond Flying, other initiatives are then creating also a pressure for change? So what is your perspective on that?
It's a combination. Some areas are tougher to handle. So for example, it took me like a year to nag my boss into having a female board member. We've always had only male board members. We have many women in management, but no board members. And so one of the things that I did was really, and this was before legislation came in, is really to shame, in a sense. So I would pull out all these statistics that show, we are one of only 5 public listed companies in the whole country that has an all-male board. And I keep hammering in that point. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like it at all. So I'll get into many fights with him, but it gets through eventually. And of course, it helps when the law comes in. Some things, when it comes to, say, for example, the one that I mentioned just now about women in a maternity situation, I mean, honestly, they've just never thought about it because there's just so few women as pilots. So one of the things, my colleague, she's a young pilot, she just had a baby, and she came and asked me, can we do something about our pump policy? So what do you mean? She said, well, I have to pump, I'm flying, there's nowhere for me to go. So I said, what do you do now? Well, I just do it in the cockpit. She doesn't mind. She'll just tell her captain, hi, captain, I'm going to be pumping now. And the older pilots will be, the younger pilots will be fine with it because, they have wives as well, and they're having kids. But the older pilots will be really shocked. They would be, and so when I came back, I said, okay, if that is the issue that pilots face, because we operate only narrow body aircraft. So we don't even have a place like wide body aircraft where crew can go at the back. So what do crew do? And so I had a meeting with our crew department, and she said, she just went quiet, our head of cabin crew, and she just went quiet. She said, I know this is an issue we need to think about, but we don't want to think about it. So I think it's not necessarily for any reasons other than the fact, especially for pilots, is that there are just so few women pilots. It's just no one even thinks about it. And one of the things that has to change is because we have more women pilots. So it comes from within it. So as an airline with the most female pilots in the country, it's something that we have to do. And it has never been something that we have to wait for legislation. So in this case, we have to initiate the legislative change. So that will be engaging the policymakers, speaking to civil aviation, gathering all these data. I mean, we don't come from, I think one of the differences between the environment that you work in and the environment that I work in would be the policy environment. It's a lot more enabling, a lot more expertise, say in EU, to come up with these policies, and we just don't have that sort of expertise in the policy making level. So what we have to do the work. So we'll gather examples from Europe, from North America, and then we'll put together a paper and say, look, this is very done in the US. What are you talking about? What do you mean by safety? So those are some of the things that has to be done in our region. Yeah.
Mariana, you have posted one question. Do you want to ask the question verbally?
Yes, one moment, please. Hi, Munching, how are you doing? Thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry, I've been keeping my camera off because I'm currently not at my best of health. But thank you so much. I had a question on your efforts to bring more women into other functions aside from pilots, for example. So you mentioned engineers, and I imagine a lot of other technical roles. So I was just wondering if you also did, your company also did something related to like working with universities in the region, for example, to also, touch the pool of candidates that would come in the future, or perhaps other measures that you said your colleagues that were struggling to find those women? How did they do it? How did they overcome that?
So it was a progressively. Initially, we started with careers fairs, and that has been quite fruitful, but it hasn't been enough to get women into engineering roles, for the simple fact that very few women are even going into engineering fields. So when I grew up, it is not something that is acceptable for a girl. A girl would become an accountant, a boy would become an engineer. That's kind of drilled into us. So I was kind of trying to figure out what was the bottleneck. Was it because we weren't hiring? No, it wasn't. We really tried. So one day I was at the engineering warehouse and I saw a group of interns. They were all from engineering school and they was interning with us. And I asked them, how many women were there in their class? There were 40 of them. And they said 4. So it was totally reflective of those the statistics that were going in. And it's a bigger issue. And one of the ways we have dealt with it is we do a lot more talks in school, because if you don't get women to go into engineering school, they will never make their way to us. Of course, there are a lot more that we can do, but it's currently on hold because of course, the pandemic too. I was also looking at the economics of training an engineer. It actually costs double to train an engineer as it is to train a pilot. So even if we offered a scholarship, the immediate attention of human resources will be, let's do pilots because we can get women pilots easier. More women want to join. It costs half as much. So hopefully, as things recover, it will enable us to be more targeted on creating apprenticeships for women in engineering roles as well. Yeah.
Ladies, don't be shy with your questions to Monqing, please.
Daniel, you have another?
So then I have a question. How could, for example, such an initiative like Ladies Beyond Flying drive exactly your topic to create more awareness? How can such community help, for example, also you in your own undertakings? Is there something you have in mind where this community can take over some task, be maybe also the echo chamber of your ideas and initiatives in your airline?
Well, definitely, it's good to know what are the practices in other organizations and other airlines as well. So one of the things I've been trying to gather is what are other airlines doing in terms of maternity policies, etc. How do they deal with this issue about with childcare for women as well. So groups like this has been helpful. I mean, other than this, I also speak with other colleagues from American Airlines, and they've been really helpful in sharing what they do as well. In fact, our anti-trafficking program started with trainers from American Airlines. So they came and they helped us put in place also a program. So some industry industry sharings in groups such as this have been really helpful. And typically these are issues that are new. You know, mostly are when we did anti-trafficking. I mean, it was all female crew because some of them started doing it because they themselves were trafficking victims. So they understand the nuances of what we were looking for. Of course, beyond this, I mean, I would of course hope that it doesn't remain just female membership. It's the challenge is how do we get more male members into the group who would help us support the agenda as well. Because when in my own organization, one of the challenges is that you speak up and you will be branded, the feminist, the feminazi who is there to, attack your male colleagues and asking for special privileges. So having male colleagues speak up would also be helpful, especially in the industry. I still don't think there's enough, so that is still a long way to go. Yeah.
And you were just posting a question, and I hope you are open to raise your voice.
Yeah, sure. Hi, thank you so much. This is really inspirational, and so appreciate this. I'm going to talk in London on Thursday very shortly about women in aviation And this is, this really resonates with how do we raise awareness. And I really like your male inclusion as well, because that is very important. But in my experience, I've always felt that the airline community is very, very closed. As I've written here, my question, it's a very sort of closed community, almost terrified of benchmarking and talking to others about the, most topics. Are you finding? I sort of myself feel that we are. It's getting a bit better, but it's painfully slow. Are you finding that it's changing, or is it mainly the Americans that you can reach out and talk to, or do you find that it's easy to talk to other European airlines, or what's your thoughts on that?
We have gotten quite a bit of assistance from American colleagues, mainly because when I started on anti-trafficking, they were the ones who started that. I don't know. I have to say I don't know enough people in the industry in Europe, so I haven't been able to reach out. I mean, you're right. It is a very closed industry, and everybody sort of said like, oh, why are you talking to us about female pilots? We already have so many. Look at that airline; they have one. But if you're going to compete with the lowest common denominator, no one will get anywhere. So I make it a point to actually do a lot of research into it. So one of the things that was really interesting was that no one would believe that. So when I say one of the questions I always ask them is to guess which country has the highest percentage of female pilots. And everybody would be thinking, oh, this must be the United States, or maybe say UK or Germany. And the surprising thing is always that it's India. And that really, jolts something in there, because they are Asian, they are people that we can relate to. So if they can do it, so why not? So one of the things I would say, that's interesting, because then it made me think, do we have, because Malaysia has people of mixed different ethnicities. I'm ethnically Chinese. We also have huge population of ethnic Indian Malaysians as well. And I was thinking, do we have Indian Malaysian pilots? And so I looked through that, and I found that we actually had 3. So I thought, okay, that's really interesting. We've never used them in our corporate presentation. So one of the things that we could do is to get them as representative and ambassadors of the company. So those are some of the ways that we try to do that in the region. But whether it changes the other countries, yes, it has. I can tell you it definitely has. After we've done this, we've changed the retirement age for cabin crew. It really changed across the region. It changed Malaysia Airlines, it changed Singapore Airlines, it changed many airlines. So I'm hoping that the maternity policy changes will also equally shake up the region as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I was very surprised when you said India, and I might actually, if I may, I'd like to use that example on Thursday myself. Yes, it was 12%, wasn't it?
12% India is 12.7% Air India. If you send me an email, I can actually share you the statistics. They have the
wonderful. That's fabulous. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
And interestingly, the airline with the highest, I believe, is Air India or Indigo. So they have the highest in total.
Yeah, it's Air India. And which is interesting, because Air India is actually the legacy airline, and Indigo, the new one. Yeah. So the other thing we're also trying to look at would be like the Middle East as well, because a lot of Malaysians work in the Middle East. So we also get some information about them. But I mean, some things are slightly more progressive. For example, they still have this prohibition of women flying while pregnant, but they have a job guarantee. So if you don't fly, then you're guaranteed a desk job. So of course they can afford to do that, and so that is one of those things that we're bringing back. So when I thought about it, I said, why can't we provide women with a guaranteed desk job? They could do something or with another department. And they say, oh, we can't because there's so many and it's going to cost us so much. And I said, really? Tell me how many females have gotten pregnant in the last 5 years. And you know what? There was one a year. So I said, are you kidding me? And they have no way to counter it. They have to introduce it.
I love it. Data. Yes, data anytime. I'll hand it over to the others who have questions here. Thank you so much.
Janet, you were asking a question. Maybe you want to raise it.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks so much. It's my first time here. And Daniel, thank you for inviting me. Munching, lovely presentation. I'm really curious about leader development, and I'm just going to read exactly what I wrote in the chat. And so leader development and career progression. What are the bases of promotion, and how intentional and effective is leader development? And then how inclusive is that process?
Unfortunately, I have to say that our succession for women is not great, but we have always had female CEOs, but there is this huge gap, and I was trying to figure this out. One of the things, I mean, I've spent so much time of my career in AirAsia, and I made it because I'm outspoken. So, well, partly yes, partly no. You know, I made it to an extent, but there are also, I would say that there is something that holds me back as well because I'm outspoken. But then recently we have a new female CEO. She came from Danone, French company in Indonesia. She's our current CEO of AirAsia Indonesia. And she shared something that we didn't have. You know? So they have a very extensive leadership program where they would pair a middle manager, a female middle manager, with a senior management person. It could be a man, it could be a woman. And that person has guided her career for 10 years to the point that she became a CEO. You know, he introduced her to people who would help boost her career. He helped develop her skill. He would point out to her, give her frank feedback. They have a regular meeting, made it a point to have a meeting every month. And that was something that's something we totally lack. I didn't have a mentor like that in my career, and I think it would have helped me as well. So I think that's something that really could change if we want to get more women into management. So the first thing is really to get people who buy into it, whether they are men or women, and to set a program. It can't be something that is kind of loosely structured. Hey, here's your mentor, take it on. But what she shared was that you really need a structure behind it. You have to have regular sessions. They have to report in. They have to give measures. Yeah. So I think that is something that I've learned.
By the way, here I can really recommend Women in Aviation and Logistics. They have a very interesting mentorship program. I was one of the mentors, and I had a wonderful mentee, and I think we really achieved a lot. And I can only recommend everybody to look into this. Women in Aviation Logistics have also a LinkedIn group, and they are really helping female leaders to evolve and also exactly have such a structure and support each other.
I want to share this one thing I heard from our head of human resource, the previous one. So he shared something very interesting because he used to work in Standard Chartered, a big bank, and it was male-dominated board as well. So then ESG came into practice, and they had to have women in the board. So he said so he went to the chairman of the company and said, we need to have a woman in the board because we need it for compliance. So the guy said, okay, fine, you can have one. And so he introduced one woman to the board, and he found that it was totally not working out because she became one of the boys. And it didn't change the dynamics of the group. She had to be one of the boys to survive. So he said to the chairman, I need another one. So the guy said, all right, okay, I'll give you one more. So he introduced a second woman to the board. And it still didn't work because he found that because there were two women in the board, they started competing with each other. So he wasn't happy, chairman wasn't happy. He said, you know, this experiment of yours is a total failure. You know, it only caused more conflict, and I don't want conflict on my board. So he said, okay, I'll put my job on the line. You give me one more and give me 6 months. And so the guy said, all right. So he had a third one, and that is when it really changed. Because when you have 3 and you have enough clout, then the women agenda came in. And the difference is that he found that in a bank, of course, it's all, you know, gambling. People were taking risks with money, high risk. And when you have a lot of testosterone in the group, that's where the high risk ventures come in. But when you have women in the board, that's when they start having plans for the future. Women were more conservative about how they take risks. They were better at putting in place long-term plans. And so that really changed how the organization viewed women in the board.
But it's interesting because it was somehow, let's say, a fun moment in your presentation when you were saying amongst the baggage handlers, they were suddenly taking more care, were smelling better, and so on. So it seems if you put a female leader in the boardroom, they are not having the same behavior. So that's the question. What can the management learn from baggage handlers once a female is in the group?
You definitely have to have a group. We didn't have one female baggage handler. We had a whole batch of them. So there were like 25 of them who were introduced together. And so they started as a women-only group. And the women-only group were exceeding all the male groups, by miles. They were faster. They were turning around things with less damage, less baggage being lost. So they had camaraderie because they were a tight group. They were also proud of the fact that they were the first. We use them a lot in the media, so their families were proud of them because don't forget, like a lot of these girls didn't have tertiary education. They would have high school education. If they didn't have an opportunity to get into a big company, chances are they would probably be doing home-based businesses. So being part of a big company was a point of pride for them, and they took their jobs very, very seriously. And eventually, many of them moved on to other roles. Some of them moved on to corporate roles. Some of them, even trained to be pilots. And that has continued till today. Yeah.
So I'm often seeing in the news an all-female cockpit or an all-female rostered aircraft and then flight. Is it exactly helping the movement, or is it counterintuitive because it's always taken as something exceptional? Because usually you have exceptional news. So is it maybe time to not talk about this and keep it as it's a standard? A female pilot, it's normal. It's not necessary to be in the news, or is it still required to be mentioned in the news?
Less and less we single it out. I mean, I think we look at it broadly more as women instead. Of course, now we are expanding into digital lines. The other one is looking at women in tech as well. But it does help. I think one of the it's a very subtle thing. You don't really have to always use a media ad or to point out this. But each time I'm on a flight and the announcement comes on and the captain is a woman, you can see people sit up a bit because they're so used to hearing a male voice as a captain and a female voice as the leading crew. And when the announcement comes on and it's a female captain, you can really see people respond in the cockpit. So I think that itself is important as a way to make it so normalized. You shouldn't be surprised, actually.
And Sharina, you made some comments. Do you want to speak up?
Hi, yes. First of all, very, very good presentation. I don't think I've sat in such a presentation before where concrete actions were also taken based on the data that you get. So very interesting to see. On one level, personally, because I come from a STEM background, I worked in IT. I started my career with IBS, where Daniel works now, where there's a very high percentage of women managers. So I never felt as a person that as a woman I'm discriminated at all. So for me, it's very strange to be discriminated at. But also, I think last year, me and Alexandra, we went to the Dubai air show, and there were hardly any women. And then I was like, where are the women? That's when I kind of hit me that, okay, maybe in some cases, there is hardly any women representation. But I see that in the UAE, they make a lot of efforts to make sure that at least especially nationals come into the trainee programs and the apprentice programs and so on, and even pilot programs. So I see a lot of action here, but it's very, very interesting to see data from an Asian country. And I wanted to talk about the Indian numbers that were mentioned. So I knew Indigo also had a very high percentage. And I was just Googling on the site as to why. And one thing that came up is probably because India has got this National Cadet Corps. So where as school children, you can go in and join the Cadet Corps. And then on, you can go and join the Army, Navy, or the Air Force. And I don't know the rules now or the regulations now. When I was just about to finish uni, till then, I don't think they had a long service commission. They had only a short service commission for women at that time, but it was possible to go in and join the army at least for a few years, for 8 years or so, and be in the short service commission. So that was a path that was available for women even when I was growing up. So that could be why, and because of army families, could be why you see a lot of women pilots.
That's very interesting. I didn't actually know why. I was really wondering why as well myself, but this makes total sense. What you just.
So you go in as a kid. That means you're used to camp and going in and learning survival techniques and things like that. Then you're taught swimming, all kind of activities. I personally wanted to go. My father wouldn't let me, but I know friends who have been, and they're probably more active as well. The people who have joined the cadet course at that time.
Yeah, it's interesting because the Ops 2020, the virtual Ops 2020 of IBS Software, where the Aviation Women panel was one of the virtual sessions, we also had the pilot panel, and there was a pilot from Indigo, and she explained why she became a pilot, what was her driver, and so on. And also the way she was explaining it was, it was one way to have a job and to become an engineer, and that's why that was her aspiration, to become a pilot. And that was quite interesting. And as you said earlier, Munching, it is somehow counterintuitive to believe that in India you have the highest rate of female pilots in the world. And that's exactly the fact. And I'm working for an Indian company, so I'm glad that this country is somehow the role model potentially for other countries in the world too.
Yeah, I mean, when I started in aviation, I was not only woman, but I was also young. So every meeting I went to, they assumed that I would be the one to prepare the coffee or the one to take notes, So I had meetings in Indonesia, with the Air Force, because some of the airports are owned by Air Force, and they would be very shocked because I usually would have colleagues who are in their 50s, and then I would be running the meeting. So it's always, it's still so, but less so compared to what it was before. But it was definitely interesting for me to experience as well. But I mean, what really made the difference was that if you have a management that supports it and provides you with the decision-making power that is relevant to your role and supports your decisions, then that makes a huge difference as well.
So Mongqing, I have to tell you, I have experienced so many dull male presentations in my life. And this was one of the very rare, passionate, energized female presentations. So I can really sense how you're burning for this topic. And I thank you that you were allocating time. And for you, it's very, very late. For some of us, it's early morning. And thank you that you took the time. And I'm also grateful that you're part of this community. I hope that you are also able to attend one of the upcoming Aviation Women panel, and we have a good lineup the upcoming months. We are already fully booked till March next year, so I could just acquire somehow the speaker for April next year, and I'm very glad that our community is growing. We are now 815 members large, and I think maybe, and I will discuss this with Claire, who is also here in this call, maybe we can speak about a survey, what you were mentioning earlier, and help you to get some data points from the community, how they are tackling the challenges you were talking today in your presentation. So thank you very much again for your fantastic presentation. And to all of you, please stay healthy and safe and positive, smart and upbeat, and hope to see you all soon again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Daniel.
Bye-bye.